Hello, my name's Richard Laidlaw. I'm a professor here at the Federal University of Alagoas in northeast Brazil. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about extinction rates. The reason for that is the UN published a press release of their upcoming report on ecosystem services. And in the press release they say that up to 1 million species are going to become extinct. They don't say when the species are going to become extinct, but this is obviously a really big figure, and it made newspaper headlines all over the world. Interestingly, this isn't the first time it's happened. There was a similar headlines in 2004, prompted by a paper published in Nature on the effects of climate change on biodiversity. So we have these big figures, 1 million species published 15 years apart based on completely different methodology. And I think that the real question is this right? Are 1 million species going to go extinct? That's what people want to know. And I think to understand this, first of all, we have to remember that these are estimates of global extinction. The documented rate of extinction is much, much lower. Ridiculously lower, some people would say. We're talking about 1 or 2 species a year going extinct. Of course, it's very difficult to measure extinction in the field, so this isn't too much of a surprise. So how are they getting to these giant figures of 1 million species that are going to go extinct? Well, these global estimates of extinction, they depend on, first of all, they depend on estimates of global species richness. We have documented about 1,800,000 species, but scientists think that there could be as many as 10 million species. So some scientists even think there could be a lot more of these species. The other part of the estimate is assuming that the species that we haven't identified yet share similar ecological traits to the species that we have identified. So if we predict that 30% of species that we know about are likely to become extinct, then we can extrapolate that to say that 30% of species that we don't know about may also become extinct. And obviously this depends on these species being ecologically similar. There's a big difference here though in terms of the species that we know about and those that we don't know about. Nearly all of the species we don't know about are very small, tend to be insects, other arthropods. It's also important to note that most of these estimates are not actually estimates of extinction. They're estimates of species that are, people often use words like doomed or destined to become extinct. What scientists are saying is that in the future, the populations will become so small, or the conditions of the environment will change so much that these species will eventually become extinct. So it's not that they're going to be extinct by 2050 or 2075, it's that by 2050 or 2075 they are going to be living in very small populations in conditions that are not appropriate for long-term viability. So we see a lot of these headlines saying 1 million species to be extinct by 2050 are actually mistakes. What they should be saying is 1 million species may be destined to become extinct by 2050. But in any case, whether these estimates are right or not, and I think there's a lot of limitations in how they're estimated, is this really what conservation wants? This is an absolutely typical doom and gloom narrative for conservation, something that was very common in the last century, but do we really need this sort of headline? It may interest people, it may make people click on websites, but does it motivate people to do conservation? I'm not convinced by that at all. I think, are doom and gloom stories good for conservation, is the question. And I'm not convinced that they are. I think we should be focusing on the species that we know about and that we've got a possibility of saving, instead of these millions of undocumented species that may or may not exist and which may or may not go extinct before we've documented them. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about global extinction risk, I have a commentary, a correspondence that was published in Nature about the UN report, and if you want to go back even further, I have a couple of papers that were published on the previous reports of 1 million species going extinct from 2004.